The ice moon of Kyreth 7 had never been meant for life. Its surface was a desolate expanse of frozen methane and crystallized nitrogen, where temperatures dropped to levels that would shatter most known metals. The Vraxian survey team had landed there purely by accident. Their navigation systems scrambled by the electromagnetic interference that pulsed through this forgotten sector of space. What they expected to find was nothing. Perhaps some mineral deposits worth cataloging, maybe a few interesting geological formations to justify the detour. What they found instead was impossible. Commander Zelthax stood at the viewport of the survey shuttle, his four eyes narrowing as he studied the readings on his forearm display. His silver-scaled hide rippled with confusion, the bioluminescent patterns along his spine flickering in agitation. Behind him, his crew of 6 moved with practiced efficiency, preparing the equipment they would need for surface exploration. They were all veterans of hundreds of planetary surveys across the galaxy, and nothing in their collective experience had prepared them for what the scanners were telling them. "There is a thermal signature," announced Kelris, the team's sensor specialist. Her voice carried that particular tone of someone who didn't quite believe their own instruments. "0.7 kilometers from our current position. It registers as a constructed shelter, not a natural formation." Zelthax felt his secondary heart begin to beat faster. The Vraxians were one of the oldest spacefaring species in the known galaxy, with records stretching back 30,000 standard years. In all that time, they had never encountered another species on this ice moon. More importantly, their databases contained no record of any civilization ever attempting to colonize such a hostile world. The energy requirements alone would be astronomical. "What is the temperature outside?" Zelthax asked, though he already knew the answer. "-190 degrees standard," Kelris replied. "The thermal signature indicates the interior of the shelter is maintaining positive 23 degrees. That's a differential of over 200 degrees. The other crew members exchanged glances. Such a temperature difference would require either advanced technology or enormous amounts of power, likely both. Yet their scans detected no power generation systems, no fusion reactors, not even the residual signatures of antimatter cores. Whatever was keeping that shelter warm was operating on principles their instruments couldn't detect. "Could it be an automated station?" suggested Vreth, the team's junior xenobiologist. "Perhaps left behind by explorers who departed long ago?" Zelthax considered this. It was possible, though unlikely. Automated systems required maintenance, and on a world this hostile, any neglected technology should have failed within years, if not months. Yet the thermal signature was stable, consistent, showing no signs of the fluctuations that would indicate failing systems. "We investigate," Zelthax decided. "Full environmental suits. Weapons on standby but not armed. Whatever built that shelter may still be present, and I prefer not to start a conflict through misunderstanding." The crew moved to comply. Zelthax watched them suit up, his mind churning through possibilities. In his 60 years of service to the Vraxian Exploration Corps, he had first contacted with 17 previously unknown species. Most had been primitive, barely capable of fire or simple tools. 3 had been technologically advanced, though none matching Vraxian capabilities. And one, just one, had been genuinely frightening in its potential. He wondered which category this new discovery would fall into. The journey across the ice took longer than expected. The surface of Kyreth 7 was treacherous, carved by eons of thermal expansion and contraction into a maze of crevasses and pressure ridges. The wind howled constantly, carrying particles of frozen gas that would have been fatal to exposed flesh. Even through the insulated layers of his environmental suit, Zelthax could feel the killing cold trying to seep through. As they crested a ridge of upthrust ice, Kelris stopped suddenly. Through the helmet comms, Zelthax heard her sharp intake of breath. "Commander, visual confirmation of the structure." Zelthax moved to stand beside her, and for a moment he too could only stare. The shelter was built into the side of a glacial cliff, using the ice itself as both foundation and wall. But it wasn't the location that shocked him. It was the construction. The structure was crude by Vraxian standards, assembled from what appeared to be salvaged metal panels welded together with imperfect seams. Some sections showed obvious damage from the hostile environment, patched over with additional layers of material. It looked desperate, improvised, like something built by survivors rather than colonists. But it was standing. Against all probability, against the crushing cold and howling winds and complete absence of resources, someone had built a shelter here and made it work. "I'm detecting life signs," Kelris announced, her voice tight with surprise. "Multiple contacts, small ones, possibly young." Zelthax felt his combat instincts surge forward. Young meant vulnerability. It meant something worth protecting. And in his experience, beings protecting their young were the most dangerous creatures in the galaxy. "Approach with caution," he ordered. "Keep your weapons holstered. We are explorers, not invaders." The entrance to the shelter was sealed with a crude airlock, another improvisation, built from what looked like repurposed cargo containers. Zelthax examined it carefully. The mechanism was simple but functional, designed to prevent heat loss while allowing entry and exit. There was a manual override on the exterior, clearly marked with symbols he didn't recognize. Before he could decide whether to attempt contact or try the override, the outer door suddenly cycled open. Zelthax and his team immediately fell back, hands moving to their weapons. But no threat emerged. Instead, they heard a voice, rough, speaking in a language that their translators struggled to process. After a moment, the devices caught up, rendering the words into Vraxian. "You're standing in the wind. Either come in or leave, but stop letting heat escape." The voice was male by the sound of it, and carried an edge of exhaustion. Also authority. This was someone accustomed to making decisions, to being obeyed. Zelthax hesitated only a moment before signaling his team forward. They entered the airlock in two groups, the outer door sealing behind them before the inner door would open. The interior of the shelter was shockingly warm. Zelthax's suit sensors registered the temperature at 24 degrees standard, warmer than the external reading had suggested. The space beyond the airlock was larger than expected, carved partially into the ice itself and reinforced with the same salvaged metal that made up the outer walls. Lights hung from the ceiling, simple chemical glow strips, the kind used in emergency kits, arranged to provide even illumination. And there, standing beside a jury-rigged heating unit, was the human. Zelthax had never seen one in person before. He had read reports, of course. Everyone in the Corps had, after humanity's unexpected arrival on the galactic stage 70 years ago. But reports didn't capture the reality of their presence. The human was smaller than a Vraxian, standing perhaps 1.7 meters tall, with a frame that looked simultaneously fragile and compact. Its skin was pale, likely from extended time away from natural sunlight, and covered partially in worn thermal clothing. But what struck Zelthax most were the eyes, a shade of blue-green he had never seen before, watching his team with an alertness that bordered on predatory. "You're Vraxian," the human said. It wasn't a question. "I've seen your ships on the trade routes. Never expected to meet one out here." Zelthax forced his translator to respond. "I am Commander Zelthax of the Vraxian Exploration Corps. We detected your thermal signature during a survey of this system." "We meant no intrusion." The human's mouth twisted into something that might have been a smile, though Zelthax couldn't read the expression with confidence. "No intrusion, just surprise." He gestured around the shelter. "Not exactly on any trade maps, are we?" "No." Zelthax agreed. His eyes were taking in the details of the space. The heating unit was clearly salvaged technology, multiple different components wired together in a way that would make any engineer nervous. Food containers were stacked along one wall, bearing labels in human script. And there, movement in the shadows beyond a hanging thermal curtain. The young ones. Zelthax's combat training screamed warnings. "What brings a Vraxian survey team this deep into uncharted space?" the human asked casually, but Zelthax could hear the tension underneath. This person was evaluating threats, calculating odds. A fellow professional. "Navigation error," Zelthax admitted. There seemed little point in deception. "Our systems were disrupted by electromagnetic interference. We are attempting to recalibrate before continuing our mission." He paused, then asked the obvious question. "What brings a human to an ice moon where nothing can possibly survive?" For a long moment, the human didn't answer. His eyes moved across Zelthax's team, counting them, noting their positions and equipment. Then he said simply, "Necessity." Before Zelthax could press for clarification, a sound emerged from beyond the thermal curtain. A small voice, young and afraid, speaking in human language. The man's posture changed instantly, tension flooding through him like electricity. He turned slightly, angling his body between the Vraxians and the source of the sound. "It's all right," he called back in his own language. "Stay where you are." Zelthax understood then. This human wasn't here for exploration or research or resource extraction. He was here because he had nowhere else to go. And he had brought children with him, or perhaps he had found them here, it didn't matter. What mattered was that he was protecting them, in one of the most hostile environments in this sector of space, using nothing but salvaged technology and desperate innovation. "We mean no harm to your young," Zelthax said carefully. "We are scientists and explorers, not soldiers." The human studied him for a long moment. And Zelthax had the uncomfortable sensation of being assessed by someone with far more combat experience than a simple survey mission would warrant. Finally, the man nodded slightly. "Marcus," he said. "My name is Marcus Chen, and those are my kids back there. 3 of them." His jaw tightened. "And before you ask, yes, I know this is a death world. Yes, I know the odds of survival here are effectively 0. And no, we can't leave." The final sentence carried a weight that went beyond simple statement. It was finality, the sound of a man who had already explored every option and found them all wanting. Zelthax felt his curiosity sharpen into genuine concern. "Cannot or will not?" he asked. Marcus's expression hardened. "Cannot. We're running from something, Commander, something that has more resources, better ships, and longer reach than you'd believe. Out here, on a moon that doesn't officially exist in any database, we have a chance. Anywhere else," he shook his head, "anywhere else, they'd find us within a cycle. And my kids don't deserve what would happen next." Zelthax exchanged glances with his team. This was quickly becoming more complicated than a simple first contact. If this human was fleeing from some authority, whether human or otherwise, then the Vraxians might be stepping into political waters they didn't understand. But before he could formulate a response, Kelris spoke up. "Commander, I'm detecting an energy spike. Atmospheric entry trajectory approximately 15 minutes out." Marcus's head snapped toward her, his body going rigid. "Can you identify the ship?" Kelris worked her instruments quickly. "Negative. The electromagnetic interference is too severe for detailed scans, but the entry angle is deliberate, not random. Someone knows this moon is here, and they're coming down fast." Zelthax watched the color drain from Marcus's face. The human moved immediately, striding toward the thermal curtain and calling out in his own language. Small figures emerged. 3 children, as he'd said, ranging in age from perhaps 6 to 12 standard years. They looked thin, their clothing patched and worn, but their eyes were bright and alert. Marcus knelt beside them, speaking quickly in tones that were both urgent and reassuring. Then he stood and turned back to Zelthax. When he spoke, his voice carried the flat certainty of someone making a final stand. "Commander, I need you and your team to leave. Right now. Whatever ship is coming, it's not here for a friendly visit. And when they find out you've been here, they'll have questions you really don't want to answer." But Zelthax was Vraxian, and Vraxians didn't abandon people to unknown threats. Not without understanding what they were abandoning them to. "Who is coming?" he asked. Marcus met his eyes, and in that moment, Zelthax saw something he recognized from a dozen different war zones across the galaxy. The look of someone who had already accepted their own death but was still fighting for something greater. "Hunters," Marcus said simply. "And if they take my kids, they'll wish I'd let them freeze." Zelthax had commanded survey missions across 36 hostile worlds, negotiated first contact with species whose very biology was incomprehensible, and once survived an unprovoked attack by pirates in the outer reaches. He understood danger in all its forms. But there was something in Marcus's voice that sent his combat instincts into full alert. Not the danger of the moment, but the exhausted certainty of someone who had been running for far too long. "Explain quickly," Zelthax ordered. "My ship has defensive capabilities, and my crew is trained for contingencies. But I cannot make tactical decisions without information." Marcus looked at him for a long moment, clearly weighing whether to trust strangers who had appeared without warning in his desperate refuge. Finally, he gestured toward the crude table in the center of the shelter. The 3 children retreated back beyond the thermal curtain, though Zelthax noticed they remained close enough to hear. Smart. Their father had trained them to stay aware of their surroundings. "I was a logistics coordinator for human deep space operations," Marcus began, his words coming quickly now. "Nothing glamorous. Supply routes, resource allocation, making sure remote stations didn't run out of food or fuel. But 6 months ago, I stumbled across discrepancies in the shipping manifests. Resources being diverted to locations that didn't exist in official records. Amounts too large to be simple theft, too consistent to be accounting errors." Kelris moved closer, her sensor suite quietly recording. Zelthax allowed it. Documentation might prove valuable, depending on what came next. "I should have reported it and walked away," Marcus continued, his jaw tight. "But I'm an idiot who believes in doing the right thing. So I started digging. Found out the diversions were connected to a black site research facility operated by a private military contractor called Meridian Security. And what they were researching..." He stopped, his expression darkening. "They were experimenting on human children, testing genetic modifications, neural enhancements, trying to create enhanced soldiers from kids stolen from colony worlds." Several of Zelthax's team members made sounds of revulsion. Even among the diverse species of the galactic community, such practices were universally condemned. Children were sacred across nearly every known culture. "I copied the files," Marcus said. "Everything I could find, planned to take them to the authorities, but Meridian found out before I could transmit the data. They killed my wife." His voice cracked slightly, then steadied. "They killed her when they raided our home. I managed to grab my kids and run, but not before I discovered something worse. 3 of the children in their research facility were scheduled for termination. Failed experiments, they called them. Just kids who didn't respond to their modifications the way they wanted." "You took them," Zelthax said, understanding flooding through him. "I broke into their facility and took them," Marcus confirmed. "Along with my own 3 children, I ran. Meridian has been hunting us ever since. They have connections throughout human space and beyond. Enough money to buy information from anyone. Enough reach to track us to the edges of known civilization. So I kept moving, kept running, until I found this place. A moon that doesn't appear in any databases because the survey team that found it crashed before transmitting their data. No beacons, no markers, nothing to indicate anyone has ever been here. Vreth, the young xenobiologist, spoke up hesitantly. But the children you rescued, you said 6 total. We scan only 3 life signs beyond you. The silence that followed was answer enough. Marcus's face became a mask, carefully empty of expression. This moon is the most hostile environment I've ever encountered. I've kept them alive for 5 months using salvaged equipment and desperation. But 2 weeks ago, one of the rescued children, a girl named Sarah, developed respiratory complications. The cold, the recycled air, the stress on her body from the modifications Meridian had made to her system. I tried everything. Every medical technique I could access from my limited database, every improvisation I could think of. He stopped, and when he continued, his voice was barely above a whisper. She died 4 days ago. I buried her in the ice 1/2 kilometer from here, and every single night since then, I've lain awake wondering which of my kids will be next. But at least here, if they die, it'll be from nature. Not from being torn apart in some corporate lab by people who see them as products. The shelter fell silent except for the constant hum of the heating unit and the distant howl of wind outside. Zelthax felt a complex mix of emotions: respect for this human's desperate courage, horror at the situation that had driven him to such measures, and a growing anger at the organization that had created this nightmare. "Commander," Kelris said urgently, "the incoming ship is 7 minutes out, and I'm getting better resolution now. It's definitely a combat vessel, human design, but heavily modified with what appear to be Calthian weapon systems." Marcus's expression went cold and hard. "That's them. Meridian uses Calthian tech because it's not restricted by human treaties." He looked at Zelthax directly. "Commander, I'm asking you again. Take your team and leave. Your shuttle is small enough that if you lift off now and stay low to the surface, the interference will hide you until you can jump away. These people are ruthless, and they have no reason to let witnesses survive." But Zelthax was calculating different odds. His shuttle was indeed small, but it was also armed with defensive systems designed to protect survey teams in hostile territory. More importantly, it had shields capable of handling significantly more punishment than a typical civilian vessel. And while Meridian might be dangerous within human space, they had no authority over a Vraxian exploration team operating under core charter. "How many children did you say you rescued?" Zelthax asked. Marcus blinked at the apparent change of subject. 3 originally, 2 remaining now, plus my 3 biological children. Why? 5 children, 1 adult. My shuttle has capacity for 12 with emergency seating. Zelthax turned to his team. "Kelris, prepare an evacuation corridor. Vreth, Yalnis, you will help load the children. Move everything essential. Food, medical supplies, environmental gear. We have..." He checked his readout. 5 minutes before that ship achieves orbit. Marcus stared at him as if he had started speaking in tongues. "Commander, you don't understand what you're offering. Meridian will hunt anyone who helps us. They have resources across multiple sectors. They'll target your ship, your crew, your families back home." Zelthax met the human's gaze steadily. "I am a commander in the Vraxian Exploration Corps, operating under full diplomatic authority. Our homeworld has stood for 30,000 years, and we maintain defensive capabilities that have deterred aggressors far more formidable than a private military contractor. More importantly," and here, his voice took on an edge that made several of his crew members straighten in recognition, "the Vraxian people do not abandon children to torture and death because we fear retaliation." For a moment, Marcus simply stood there, and Zelthax saw emotions flicker across his face too quickly to fully interpret. Then the human moved, spinning toward the thermal curtain and calling out in his language. The children emerged immediately. "Well trained," Zelthax noted again. They had clearly been prepared for rapid evacuation. The next 3 minutes were controlled chaos. Marcus moved with the efficiency of someone who had practiced emergency evacuations many times, gathering supplies in a specific order. The Vraxian crew helped, following his directions, even when they didn't fully understand the reasoning. Zelthax noted that the children were thin but alert, watching the alien beings with wide eyes, but no panic. Their father had prepared them for strangeness. 2 of the children were clearly Marcus's biological offspring. They shared his facial structure, his coloring. The girl looked about 12, the younger boy perhaps 8. But the 2 rescued children were immediately identifiable by the modifications that had been done to them. One boy, maybe 10 years old, had eyes that reflected light like a cat's, and his movements carried an unnatural precision. The other child, younger at perhaps 6, had visible neural interface ports along their temples, the skin around them showing signs of poor healing. Zelthax felt his anger crystallize into something cold and focused. This was what Marcus had been fighting against. This was what had driven him to the edge of known space, to a frozen moon, where survival was measured in days and weeks rather than years. "Commander," Kelris's voice cut through the activity. "The ship is beginning atmospheric entry. We have 2 minutes, maybe less." "Everyone to the airlock," Zelthax ordered. "Marcus, stay close to your children. My crew will handle the equipment." They moved as a unit, the Vraxian training meshing surprisingly well with Marcus's desperate efficiency. The human grabbed a small data chip from a hidden pocket. The evidence he'd stolen, Zelthax realized, the information that had started this entire catastrophic chain. Everything Marcus had sacrificed, everything he'd endured, captured in that tiny piece of technology. The journey back to the shuttle should have taken 15 minutes. They made it in 8, practically running across the treacherous ice with the children in the center of their formation, protected from the killing wind by Vraxian environmental shields. Zelthax's shuttle pilot, Kreneth, had already powered up the engines by the time they arrived, the vessel's thermal signature blazing like a beacon against the frozen landscape. "Load quickly," Zelthax commanded. "Kreneth, prepare for immediate liftoff. Defensive shields to maximum." The children were strapped into emergency seats, Marcus helping to secure them while explaining in quick, calm words what was about to happen. The rescued children looked terrified but determined. The biological children looked grimly prepared. This was clearly not their first desperate escape. "Commander, contact from the incoming vessel," Kelris announced as the shuttle's airlock sealed. "They're demanding we identify ourselves and state our purpose." "Ignore them," Zelthax said. "We are under no obligation to respond to non-authority vessels." He moved to the command station, his fingers dancing across the controls. "Kreneth, take us up. Stay in the interference zone as long as possible." The shuttle lifted off with a surge of power that pressed everyone back into their seats. Through the viewports, Zelthax watched the frozen surface of Kireth 7 fall away. And there, descending through the upper atmosphere, was the Meridian ship, sleek, predatory, bristling with weapons that were definitely not standard commercial issue. "They're hailing us again," Kelris reported. "This time with a threat. Stand down or they will open fire." Zelthax's lips pulled back from his teeth in the Vraxian equivalent of a combat smile. "Record this transmission and ensure it includes our core's identification. Send to all frequencies. I want documentation of their threat against a diplomatic vessel." Marcus had moved forward, still securing his youngest daughter's safety harness, even as he watched the Meridian ship through the viewport. "Commander, they're not bluffing. That ship has enough firepower to crack your shields." "Perhaps," Zelthax acknowledged. "But they will have to consider the consequences of attacking a Vraxian core vessel in front of multiple witnesses while their threat is being broadcast on open channels. Even a private military contractor must answer to some authority." The Meridian ship was moving to intercept now, its engines flaring bright against the dark of space. Zelthax's hands moved across his controls, bringing the shuttle's defensive systems fully online. It wasn't a warship, but Vraxian engineering was thorough. Even survey vessels carried weapons sufficient to discourage piracy. "Target lock from the bogey," Kreneth announced, his voice tight but steady. "They're charging weapons." "Evasive pattern Delta," Zelthax ordered. "Keep us in the interference zone. They won't risk a miss in this electromagnetic soup." The shuttle banked hard, its inertial dampeners struggling to compensate for the sudden maneuver. One of the children cried out, quickly stifled. The Meridian ship followed, but Zelthax had been right. In the zone of heavy interference, their targeting systems were degraded. A miss wouldn't just be embarrassing. It would waste energy they might need for subsequent attacks. "They're attempting to flank us," Kelris called out. "Trying to force us up out of the interference." Marcus spoke up, his voice carrying the calm authority of someone accustomed to tactical situations. "There's a thermal vent 60 degrees port. I mapped it weeks ago. Massive electromagnetic surge every few minutes. If you can time it right, the discharge will blind their sensors completely." Zelthax glanced at the human, reassessing once more. "You're certain?" "I've had 5 months to learn every quirk of this moon," Marcus replied grimly. "It's how I avoided their previous search patterns." "Kreneth, adjust course. 60 degrees port. Marcus, tell me when we're approaching your vent." The next 30 seconds felt like an eternity. The Meridian ship was closing, its weapons hot and ready. Zelthax could see it through the viewport now, larger than his shuttle, more heavily armed, crewed by people who had already demonstrated their willingness to kill. His crew was silent, professional, but he could sense their tension. 20 seconds to the vent," Marcus announced, his eyes on the sensor displays. 15, 10, now right there. Kreneth dove the shuttle hard toward the coordinates Marcus had indicated, and suddenly their instruments went haywire. The electromagnetic discharge from the thermal vent was massive, a pulse of energy that washed across the entire area like a wave. Behind them, the Meridian ship's systems flickered and degraded. "Full burn," Zelthax commanded. "Get us beyond the interference zone before they recover." The shuttle's engines screamed, pushing beyond their safety margins as Kreneth poured power into escape velocity. The frozen moon fell away beneath them. And then they were clear of the interference, their systems stabilizing as clean space opened up around them. "Jump coordinates locked," Kreneth reported. "Ready on your command." Zelthax looked back at the Meridian ship. They were recovering, their systems coming back online. In moments, they would be in pursuit again. But now the shuttle was in clean space, and that meant Vraxian communications were no longer blocked. "Kelris, transmit our encounter report to Core Command. Include everything. The threat from Meridian, the children's situation, the evidence Marcus carries. Make sure it's logged and distributed through standard channels." He watched the Meridian ship's trajectory shift as they realized what was happening. Their weapons powered down. With Vraxian Core Command now aware of the situation, attacking would be an act of war, not just a private enforcement action. They had lost their window. "Jump drive ready," Kreneth announced. Zelthax looked back at Marcus and the 5 children strapped into emergency seats. The human was holding his daughter's hand, his other arm around his son, and his expression was one of exhausted disbelief. The man had been running for 6 months, had watched one child die and faced the probability that more would follow, had prepared himself to make a final stand on a frozen moon at the edge of nowhere. And now, against all odds, he and his remaining children were safe. The jump through hyperspace took 3 hours by standard measurement, though time always felt strange in the space between spaces. Zelthax used those hours to file additional reports, compile evidence, and most importantly, to observe the humans who had suddenly become his responsibility. Marcus had finally allowed himself to relax, though even in rest, his body maintained a tension that spoke of months spent expecting attack at any moment. He sat with his 3 biological children clustered close, their hands interlinked in a chain of contact that clearly provided comfort. The 2 rescued children sat slightly apart, watching the Vraxian crew with eyes that had seen far too much for their ages. Vreth, the xenobiologist, had approached them cautiously, offering food from the shuttle's supplies. The children had accepted with careful politeness, eating slowly as if still expecting each meal to be their last. It broke something in Zelthax's hearts to watch them. "Commander," Kelris said quietly, moving to stand beside him at the command station. "I've been reviewing the data chip Marcus provided. The evidence of Meridian Security's operations is extensive. Genetic experimentation on at least 47 children over a 3-year period. 17 fatalities. Another 12 who suffered permanent physical or neurological damage from the modifications." Zelthax felt his scales ripple with suppressed rage. "And the human authorities knew nothing of this?" "The data suggests certain officials were paid to look away," Kelris replied, her voice carefully neutral. "Meridian has connections throughout human space, government contracts, defense partnerships, research collaborations. They weren't just a rogue corporation operating in secret. They had protection." "Had," Zelthax emphasized. "Once this information reaches galactic circulation, no amount of protection will save them. The laws against experimentation on children are universal. Even humans, for all their sometimes chaotic governance, take such violations seriously." He turned to look at Marcus again. The human had his youngest daughter asleep against his shoulder now, her small face peaceful in a way that probably hadn't been possible for months. The man himself was staring out the viewport at the swirling colors of hyperspace, his expression unreadable. "How much longer to the station?" Marcus asked, without turning. "Approximately 47 minutes, Zelthax replied. "We're heading to Outpost Verithan, a Vraxian diplomatic station in neutral space. You and the children will be safe there while we determine the next steps." Marcus nodded slowly. "And then what? We testify, I suppose, make official statements. Watch while bureaucrats argue about jurisdiction and treaties and who has authority to prosecute." There was a bitterness in his voice that Zelthax understood. The man had sacrificed everything to protect these children, and now he was being asked to place his trust in systems that had already failed them once. "The evidence you carry is compelling," Zelthax said carefully. "But yes, there will be processes. The galactic community takes such accusations seriously, but we also require thorough investigation before action. It is not ideal, but it prevents false accusations from destroying innocent parties." "Nothing about Meridian is innocent," Marcus replied flatly. "No," Zelthax agreed. "I suspect not, but we must follow proper procedures nonetheless." The shuttle emerged from hyperspace exactly on schedule, the swirling chaos of the jump giving way to the ordered darkness of normal space. Outpost Verithan appeared before them, a massive station that served as a crossroads for multiple species, built in neutral territory specifically to facilitate diplomatic and commercial exchanges without favoritism. As they approached the docking bay, Zelthax received a priority message on his command console. He read it quickly, his expression shifting from neutral attention to surprised approval. "It seems word travels quickly," he announced to the shuttle. "The Galactic Council has already issued a preliminary injunction against Meridian Security. Their assets are frozen, their operating licenses suspended pending investigation, and warrants have been issued for 17 corporate officers." Marcus's head snapped around. "How? We've only been in transit for 3 hours. The moment your evidence hit Vraxian core networks, our diplomatic corps began working," Zelthax explained. "We have considerable influence in galactic governance, and crimes against children bypass many of the usual political complications. No species wants to be seen as tolerating such atrocities." For the first time since Zelthax had met him, Marcus's expression cracked into something that might have been hope. "They're actually going to face consequences?" "They are going to face justice," Zelthax corrected gently. And you are going to have a chance to rebuild the life that was taken from you. The docking procedure was smooth and professional. As the shuttle settled into its berth, Zelthax could see through the viewport that they were expected. A diplomatic receiving party was already assembled, including what appeared to be human representatives from the local embassy. Behind them stood medical personnel with equipment clearly prepared for examining young patients. Marcus saw them too, and Zelthax watched the man's shoulders straighten with determination. The rescued children will need extensive medical evaluation, Marcus said. The modifications Meridian made to their systems are unstable. Sarah died because we couldn't monitor her properly. The others need real doctors, real equipment. They will receive the best care available, Zelthax assured him. The station's medical facilities serve 23 different species. Human physiology is well understood here. As the airlock cycled open and the receiving party began to board, Zelthax found himself reflecting on the strange chain of coincidence that had led to this moment. A navigation error had brought his survey team to an unmarked moon. That error had revealed a desperate father protecting children at the edge of survival. And now, because of timing and chance and the decision to investigate rather than ignore an anomalous thermal signature, those children would live. The human diplomats approached Marcus with obvious relief, speaking in their own language with words that Zelthax's translator rendered as welcoming and reassuring. The children were examined by the medical team with gentle efficiency, the doctors clearly experienced in treating traumatized young patients. And throughout it all, Marcus maintained his protective vigilance, his eyes tracking every movement around his kids, with the focus of someone who had learned the hard way that threats could come from anywhere. One of the human diplomats, a woman named Ambassador Torrens, according to her identification, approached Zelthax directly. She was older by human standards, with gray streaking her dark hair and lines of experience around her eyes. "Commander Zelthax," she said formally, extending her hand in the human gesture of greeting. "On behalf of the Human Diplomatic Corps, I want to thank you for your intervention. Marcus Chen and his children have been missing for 6 months. We feared the worst." Zelthax accepted the handshake carefully, mindful of human fragility. "It was simple decency, Ambassador. Any civilized being would have done the same." Torrens's expression suggested she disagreed with that assessment, but she didn't argue. "Nevertheless, you've done us a tremendous service, and more importantly, you've given us the evidence we needed to move against Meridian. The data chip Marcus provided is already being analyzed by our best technical teams." "What will happen to the corporation?" Zelthax asked. "Total dismantlement," Torrens replied, her voice carrying a satisfaction that bordered on vindictive. "Their leadership will face trial for crimes against humanity and violations of galactic law. Their assets will be seized to provide compensation for the victims, and we'll be conducting comprehensive audits of every government contract they held to determine how deeply their corruption spread." She paused, then added more quietly, "It won't bring back the children who died. It won't undo what was done to the survivors. But it's something." Zelthax watched as Marcus was finally separated from his children, not forcibly, but with gentle insistence that they needed proper medical examinations. The man looked lost for a moment without them, his purpose suddenly removed. Then one of the human medical staff spoke to him, and he nodded, following them toward the medical bay where he would be examined as well. "He saved them," Zelthax said softly, "against impossible odds, in an environment that should have killed them within days, using nothing but salvaged equipment and desperation. He saved them." "That's what humans do," Torrens replied. "When we love something, when we commit to protecting something, we don't calculate the odds. We don't consider whether it's practical or possible. We just fight until we win or die trying." She looked at Zelthax directly. "It makes us dangerous enemies, but it also makes us loyal friends." The ambassador moved away to coordinate with her staff, leaving Zelthax to process her words. In his 60 years of service, he had encountered many species, learned many philosophies. But there was something in the human approach to survival that struck him as unique, not just the willingness to fight against impossible odds, but the refusal to accept that those odds mattered when something precious was at stake. Over the following hours, Zelthax completed his official reports and debriefed his crew. The survey mission that had brought them to Kireth 7 was temporarily suspended while they provided testimony about their encounter with Meridian security. None of his team complained about the delay. What they had witnessed had affected them all deeply. Later, Zelthax found Marcus in one of the station's observation lounges. The human was staring out at the stars, a cup of some hot beverage steaming forgotten in his hands. He looked exhausted in a way that went beyond physical tiredness, the kind of exhaustion that came from finally being able to lower defenses that had been held up for far too long. "Your children are settled in the medical wing," Zelthax said quietly, approaching with care. "The doctors report that while they require monitoring, there are no immediate crises. The modifications will need to be carefully managed, but they are stable." Marcus nodded without speaking for a long moment. Then he said, "I thought we were going to die on that moon. Every day, I thought this would be the day the heating system failed, or we ran out of food, or the cold finally got through our shelter. I was prepared for it, accepted it. As long as my kids died free instead of in Meridian's labs, I could live with that." "You did more than keep them free," Zelthax observed. "You kept them alive, and in doing so you exposed a criminal organization that had harmed dozens of children. Because of your courage, other families will not suffer what you endured." "I wasn't being courageous," Marcus said quietly. "I was being a father. That's different." Zelthax considered this distinction. Perhaps among humans. Among Vraxians. We believe courage and love are often the same thing expressed in different contexts. Marcus turned to look at him then, really look at him, as if seeing him for the first time rather than as just another potential threat to be evaluated. "Why did you help us, Commander? You could have jumped away from that moon, reported the anomalous thermal signature to your superiors, and been done with it. No risk, no complications, no corporation hunting you for revenge. Why did you stay?" "Because it was right," Zelthax said simply. "And because the alternative was to abandon children to death or worse. No amount of political convenience or personal safety is worth that moral cost." They stood together in silence for a while, watching the stars. Finally, Marcus spoke again. "What will happen now? To me and the kids, I mean. We can't go back to our old life. Even with Meridian dismantled, there will be remnants, people who resent what I exposed, officials who want revenge for their lost bribes." "Ambassador Torrens has already made arrangements," Zelthax replied. "You and your children will be placed under diplomatic protection. New identities will be established for you on a secure colony world. And the 2 rescued children, if their families can be located, they will be reunited. If not, you have already indicated willingness to continue caring for them." Marcus's expression softened slightly. "They've already lost so much. If we can give them a real family, a real life, yes, of course I'll keep them. They're part of us now." "Then it seems you will have a large family to raise," Zelthax observed. 5 children is considerable by human standards, I believe." For the first time, Marcus actually smiled. A small, tired expression, but genuine. Yeah, it is. But we survived a frozen moon together. I figure normal childhood problems should be manageable after that." Zelthax felt his own equivalent of amusement ripple through him. This human had endured horrors, witnessed death, and fought impossible odds with nothing but determination and ingenuity. and now he was contemplating the challenge of raising 5 children as if it were just another problem to solve. Perhaps that was the essence of what made humans both dangerous and admirable, their absolute refusal to be defeated by circumstances that would crush other species. They didn't just survive adversity, they absorbed it, learned from it, and emerged ready to face whatever came next. "Commander," Kelris's voice came through his communicator. "The Galactic Council has formally requested your presence for testimony regarding the Meridian case. They're assembling a tribunal to hear evidence." Zelthax acknowledged the message, then turned back to Marcus. "I will likely be occupied with legal proceedings for some time. But before I go—" He paused, considering how to express what he felt. "Before I go, I want you to know that meeting you has changed my perspective on humanity. Your species joined the galactic community relatively recently. Many still consider you newcomers, untested. But what I witnessed on Kireth 7 demonstrated something important. Humans do not need advanced technology or superior numbers to be formidable. You have something far more dangerous, the absolute refusal to accept defeat when protecting what you love." Marcus met his eyes steadily. "We're not special, Commander. We're just stubborn, and sometimes stubborn is enough." "Sometimes," Zelthax agreed. "Stubborn is everything." They parted ways then, the Vraxian commander to his duties with the diplomatic corps, the human father to his children waiting in the medical wing. But Zelthax found himself thinking about their encounter for days afterward, even as he testified before councils and provided evidence to investigators. The story of Marcus Chen and his children spread quickly through galactic networks. It became something of a legend. The human who had defied a corporation, survived an impossible world, and protected 5 children against odds that would have killed most beings. Other species heard the story and understood something fundamental about humanity that had been easy to overlook when dealing with trade negotiations or territorial disputes. Humans were not the strongest species. They were not the fastest or the smartest or the longest lived. But they possessed something that transcended simple physical or intellectual advantages. They possessed an absolutely irrational determination to protect their own, combined with an ingenuity born from living on a world that had tried to kill them for millions of years. The galaxy had welcomed humanity as a curiosity, a young species with potential. But stories like Marcus's were changing that perception. Humanity was becoming recognized as something far more significant, a species that would never, ever stop fighting for what they believed was right, no matter the cost. And in a galaxy full of ancient civilizations, comfortable in their power and set in their ways, that kind of determined idealism was revolutionary. Zelthax received one final message from Marcus 3 months later, after the trials had concluded and the children had been settled on their new colony world. It was brief in the efficient human style. "Commander, the kids are thriving. Real food, warm beds, actual medical care. It's like a dream. The rescued ones are learning to be children again instead of experiments. My own kids are in school and complaining about homework. Normal problems, beautiful normal problems. Thank you for giving us the chance to live instead of just survive. The galaxy is lucky to have people like you watching over it. Maybe someday we'll meet again under better circumstances. Until then, stay safe out there. Marcus." Zelthax read the message several times, feeling something warm settle in his chest. Then he saved it carefully in his personal files, a reminder of why exploration mattered. Yes, they charted new worlds and cataloged strange phenomena and expanded the boundaries of known space. But sometimes the most important discoveries were the ones you couldn't predict. The desperate shelters on frozen moons, the fathers protecting their children against impossible odds, the moments when simple decency changed everything. He returned his attention to his current survey mission, another system in uncharted space, another set of worlds waiting to reveal their secrets. And if his crew noticed that their commander seemed more attentive to unexpected thermal signatures, more willing to investigate anomalies that might be nothing more than sensor glitches, well, they were professionals. They understood that sometimes the most important thing you could find wasn't a new planet or a rare mineral deposit. Sometimes it was just the chance to do the right thing at the right time. And for beings who had chosen to spend their lives exploring the unknown, that chance was worth every risk.